Guys, I think we should just cut right to the chase, get right into it, and really ask the question I think a lot of us have on our mind, which is, okay, there's been a lot of talk about AI. There's a lot of people with different opinions of how big of an impact AI will have on gaming. So from your perspective, how far will this get to? How important, how revolutionary will AI be on gaming? How far do we go? Aaron, what do you think? What's up, folks? This is Joseph Kim from Gamemakers. During GDC, Hathora, the server orchestration for multiplayer games provider, hosted live podcast sessions on various gaming topics. And I was able to moderate a panel on AI native games. What does this mean, and what do we believe the impact of AI will be on the games industry? So speaking on this topic, we had Aaron Farr, who is a former Riot engineering manager and more recently head of engineering at Singularity 6, but who is now currently the CTO of Jam&T Studios, one of the very few game studios building a completely AI-focused game experience on the studio side. We also had Liam Dean, principal analyst with a focus on gaming at Omdia, which is a global analysis, intelligence, and advisory company. So we had two folks who are very deep in AI and gaming, one from an operational micro level, and the other at the industry and macro level. We had a great discussion, and you're going to want to catch this if you're interested in AI and games. So stay tuned for a super deep and insightful discussion on AI native games. Coming at you right now.
Yeah, so on the question of like, what impact is AI going to make on the game industry? I think it is going to have an impact. I am very confident and bullish about that. But I don't want to overstate it in the sense that I don't think that the way we make, that the kind of games we have now will disappear. We're going to add and create new type of games. We're going to have new type of development processes. Things will change. So I do think it will make an impact. But we'll still recognize the kind of games we have today. They'll just be different games as well, and things that we can't do today we'll be doing. So I do really think it will make a pretty big impact.
Right, and in terms of some of the ways in which AI will impact games, there's kind of like this cost issue. There's also new player experience issue. And then there's also this issue of potentially like automating away stuff. Yeah. During this GDC, I have talked to two studios who are building like completely AI automated game studios, which I find hard to believe. But like to your point on just adding to what's there, can you talk about some of the current limits that you're seeing and why you think it just adds instead of going fully to like super intelligence, replacing and destroying humankind?
Yeah, so destroying humankind. So I want to acknowledge that within machine learning, there's a concept of like the bitter lesson of machine learning, like that we hit the limits of neural networks multiple times. And we kind of have various times we get into an AI winter where it's like, all right, all the hype, it didn't do it. And often the limitation, what we found is that we just didn't have enough data, didn't have a compute. A few years or a decade later, machine learning, neural networks come back with a vengeance and prove the detractors wrong. So in that spirit, I don't know if there will be a moment when we can AI up a game from scratch. I am currently skeptical, and I think for those of us who are looking at the impact today, there is value to be had, and for players, experience to be had where we don't necessarily need to wait until we can have a super intelligence to take advantage of this technology to make better and more fun games. I think that as an industry, we are a cross-discipline industry. It's one of the reasons I love games. So we're always adding new technology, new techniques from across technology, from entertainment. In fact, sometimes we're pioneering a lot of those areas in the actual applied sense. And so we're going to keep bringing this in. But I think it will become more of a we have this repertoire of tools. It's going to add.
Right.
The question for most developers is, where is there an actual ROI? Where is this tool better than the tools I currently have?
Right.
And I think that's the question most folks need to ask themselves.
Right, and I think that the point that you're making on the return, I think the CEO of Anthropic calls it return to intelligence, but like that question of where do you get your RTI, I think is an important concept. And for you, the limitations, a couple of things that you mentioned is compute and data. So if we're like trying to assess or gauge the limitations of AI moving to the future, would those be the main things that you look at? Are the like the limitations that we're starting to see from a compute, energy, data kind of perspective?
Yeah, so to be clear, for Jam&T, we've been focused on how do we apply generative AI in the game loop,
Yeah.
right? How do we make how does this make new type of novel gameplay possible?
Yeah.
We're also discovered some things about productivity improvements. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit. But in that note, when we're doing real-time inference, it is a very computationally intensive,
Yeah.
and we're very hungry. We have a lot of demand for it. So, in the game industry, I mean, we all know, like, there's always a new GPU, there's a new CPU. We always come up with reasons
Right.
to use all the compute possible. And so I think that will stay true also for inference,
Right.
for machine learning. We will come up with, even if you made it drastically cheaper than it is today, I have a backlog of more things I would add into it. And that would be true for a faster GPU, a faster CPU. The AI is going to have the same issue. So we are currently largely limited by those costs. And that is something that at Jam&T we attacked pretty aggressively, and go on that if we want to.
Liam Dean. So we have a perspective from someone who's on the ground building stuff, and from your perspective, more on the macro basis as doing market research and looking at the industry. How revolutionary will AI be on gaming? What are your thoughts?
I think I would have to agree with a lot of what Aaron has just said there. The limit is hard to predict because it depends on exactly what you're saying. We don't know how far we can sort of push this architecture that we have that's got its breakthroughs of the last few years. But what I think is it could stop right now. Like, we could see no more progress whatsoever in the foundational models, and we would still have a massive amount to work with. We would still see huge progress in games over the next few years, just figuring out how to operationalize that core technology that we already have, turn that into tools that are effective for game development, getting everyone to work out how to get the most out of those tools. So I think we will see a massive amount of progress regardless of what happens at the most fundamental level. Of course, if there's more progress in the models themselves, that will continue to filter down. But we're not actually dependent on that. If it turns out that we're kind of getting close to one of those limit points, even then, I still think we're going to see massive progress in AI in games over the next few years.
Okay. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about cost, automation impact on people, but there's been less discussion on the new player experiences, something that you touched upon, Aaron. And so one of the things I would love to hear more from you guys is this notion of what I'm calling like an AI native game, but fundamentally a game experience or an experience for a player that is fundamentally enabled by AI. And when we talk about that, you guys talk about what you think are some of the capabilities or potential of having an AI native game. And I know, Aaron, you're working on Retail Mage, which potentially could be something like an AI native game. It'd be great to hear more about what that is.
I will absolutely contend that it is an AI native game, but we'll decide what that term actually means. So what I think it unlocks, let me describe a couple things real quick. We tend to talk of it as what it unlocks is improvisational play, so that the game simulation plays back with you in ways that we didn't before. Games have always been dynamic, but there are still limitations, and we can kind of think of the way that, if properly integrated, the game system itself almost acts like a proxy of the designer, kind of like a dungeon master. I know people use that, maybe overuse that analogy, but it's not that wrong. Where anytime we close that feedback loop between player and designer and make it faster, we've seen major innovations in the game industry. Whether it went from box sets that had to get discs pressed to live service games to rapidly increased updates. This only increases that cycle when you have this kind of proxy of a game designer sitting there, can modify the game state and game according to how the players are playing, and that unlocks a ton of things. One of the core game design concepts that we think it creates, and we are stealing a concept from the tabletop industry here, is rulings, not rules. So in games, typically games, we have hard-coded rules that we have to follow. And we can create some heuristics and a bunch of other things, but ultimately it's a set of rules that we follow in a game. What we can create is this more fuzzy logic of rulings where the system can look at the game state and make a ruling on that in a way that we would not have been able to program before. Just never been able to program before. And we see emergent gameplay, I can give a few examples if we have the time, in Retail Mage that, again, would never have seen that type of gameplay before. And Retail Mage is more of a tech kind of showcase of what we think. Because when we did earlier technical demos, you'd see these amazing things, and you have these AI agents and a bunch of stuff going on, and we have this procedural generation. But a lot of folks were like, that's amazing, but I come from a game background. How is this a game? And so Retail Mage was our first attempt to show an early middle ground of some traditional game mechanics and AI together to create a game loop that does things that we didn't do before.
And could you help us understand that a little bit more concretely?
Yeah.
Maybe in the sense of in Retail Mage, what does the core loop look like, and how does AI integrate within that core loop?
Yeah. So Retail Mage is a party game kind of dressed up as a job simulator. I like to describe it as late-stage capitalism comes for Diagon Alley. You and your friends are wizards at the Mage Mart, Mage Mart, and in come some characters. You got 30 minutes to solve these customers' problems, and they'll give you 1 to 5 star reviews. And one thing that was important for us, you see a lot of dynamic dialogue and things like that, and we have that. We have our own AI stack, but we saw dynamic dialogue as merely a prerequisite to create the other types of gameplay we have. So we also have an AI world model. When you go up to an object in Retail Mage, you get a text box. You have a default thing you can do, like pick it up, put it in your inventory, but you can type what you want to do, and we will try to make that happen. Anything you want to do. So as an example, in brief, there was a character, a wizard who came in, wants inspiration for his spell. I walk around in the store, there's a painting on the wall, and I'm like, this is totally it. This is going to inspire you. And he's like, that's the painting. That's what I need. Well, for various reasons, we have to take it off the wall, put it in my inventory, hand it to complete the sale. Well, we have RPG mechanics, so I have a strength stat and everything. I'm too weak to do that. I cannot pull it off the wall. The system's like, no, you're not strong enough to do this. So I'm like, well, how do I make the sale? So I run around the store, I find a bookcase, I take a book off the bookcase, I rip a piece of paper out of the book, I write IOU on it, I go back to him, hand the IOU to him, and say, here, we'll ship it to you. And he's like, perfect, thank you, 4-star review. None of that was programmed ahead of time. All of that was emergent.
Wow.
Right? So the system had to determine, did I make the case from a narrative control perspective to make a ruling that this was the right thing to do? Can I rip a piece of paper out? Look, there are so many, dozens of these type of stories where we see emergent gameplay that we never would have programmed before that allows people to push the story within bounds. We do think there are bounds we want to keep, but the way that they want to go, and it plays back with them in a way that we couldn't before.
For a lot of games, there are specific win conditions, and it kind of sounds like in this case, it's more about having emergent experiences and having more experiences rather than winning. Is that, would you say that's fair? Or?
Yeah, in Retail Mage, we tried to find a middle ground, and some things we did, and some things, we learned things not to do, to be honest, in Retail Mage too, of trying to find a hybrid between these. But we did want to create these more creative experiences. We take a lot of inspiration from tabletop games, but also from experiences like immersive theater and improv, where you're having this participatory experience between the consumer and the producer of the content in real time, creating together. And there can still be win conditions that we're moving towards, traditional ones or new kinds of more fuzzy win conditions, but the experience is very different. How I get there, the journey that I go on can be very different.
I think there's an interesting comparison here with, if we look back to when online multiplayer games first started emerging, I think what makes that compelling as a format compared to traditional single-player games, or what did make it compelling, is the unpredictable and emergent nature of playing with other players. And that created another whole segment of games, a different kind of game that didn't really exist meaningfully before. But of course, to your point as well, it didn't mean that traditional single-player games went away. We still have them, and some people prefer that experience. Other people prefer the online multiplayer experience. That's actually turned out, in that case, that online multiplayer experience in one form or another is now the dominant form form in the market, but it didn't cause what we had before to go away. So it can, that's at least there's a potential here for something to emerge that's a different kind of game that allows people to engage in a different way. But it will, because it's different, it will be to some people's taste and not other people's taste. But the interesting thing is this going to be the kind of thing that hooks people who don't currently get hooked by the kind of games that we have? Like, does this add on another segment to the market, or does it just kind of cannibalize existing formats? And that's something it's going to be really hard to know until we see some of these games in the wild. What kind of people play these games? Are they people coming in from outside the games market? Are they casual players? Are they people who kind of until now got their kicks from playing against other humans, but actually maybe AI agents are more fun and they don't call you as many names? So there's a lot of kind of known unknowns there, but there are, some of these scenarios are really pretty revolutionary for where the market could be.
Right. And Liam, I think that when I try to think of at least the companies that are public about being AI native, you guys are certainly one of them. You've got Series Entertainment, you've got a few others out there, but I can only count a single-digit number of games that are at least public so far. And the kinds of AI native games that we're seeing might be like yours, where there's potentially emergent behavior and kind of interesting kind of dynamics from a user experience perspective. There might be games like Series where they're using AI to like create content for them, and it's more on the back end rather than having a different player experience. I guess a couple of questions. What are you seeing right now, and what kinds of AI native games do you think will emerge in the future? And I think the one example that I've been waiting for years is like you mentioned Dungeon Master. Like somebody, I'm sure someone at some point will make a Dungeons and Dragons AI native game where the AI is the Dungeon Master, but wanted to like hand it over to you and get your thoughts on all this.
Yeah, someone is going to do that. Like it's such an obvious concept, and it seems clearly within the limits of what can be done. So this is just going to come down to, we're going to see someone try that on a scale where it gets in front of enough consumers that we have a sort of a test case there. But how well are they going to do it? How well is it going to work? How are people going to respond to it? We have to actually see it. So that's just one of those things. We need to kind of have people out in the real world kicking the tires on it to see, does this concept work as well in reality as we're imagining that it will? But I have no doubt that we're going to see it. And to your other point about there not being that much of this activity visible, that's definitely true. And just the fact that the reality is that AI is a controversial topic, and it's especially controversial in the games industry, more so than it is kind of in the rest of the world, and it's not lacking for controversy there either. So I think there is more happening under the surface than there are companies who actually want to talk about what they're doing. They don't want to risk blowback for being a company that is doing AI experiments that some people are going to get upset about if they don't have the product at the end of the day.
Do you guys want to talk about this a little bit? Do you want to put on we were kind of joking, like when we talk about AI ethics, you got to put on the legal face and then you go into like a boring discussion. But I think with you, Aaron, when it comes to AI ethics or rights and things of that nature, what is your perspective on that?
Yeah. So a couple places from where we come from. We are game creators. Mm-hmm. We are creatives. We want to create a healthy, vibrant future in this. We think this is a way that may enhance our ability to create experiences, but not replace it. We have a narrative writer on our team, right? Like that's not a job that's been replaced. We intentionally currently we do not use AI generated art. We are largely using large language models or other kinds of similar machine learning models. There are some important questions around the use of fair use for that training data. We see interesting, and we keep track of models that have a bit more, bit better curation of their data sets. But it is not a clear cut. So there's the legal questions, and there are then the ethical questions.
Right.
My background before games was actually in open source. where we really believed a lot on how we use technology and the legal framework to create communities and create public good. But it is based on a clear understanding of copyright law
Right.
and how we work together. So I hope and expect that we will evolve in this perspective. We also take a pragmatic choice that these are technologies that are very powerful. Sometimes described it as a bit of a Napster moment, right? Like, there are market forces that will push some of these technology innovations into our world. The question is, I wanted, as a creative in the space, to be part of that conversation,
Right.
to guide it into a place that I hope is somewhere I want to live as a creative, and not merely have it be. I think one of the things I worry about in our industry is if we're not willing to sit at the table and engage and figure out how we move forward with it, those choices will be made by people outside of our industry, and the economic and market forces may adjust our industry in ways we don't want.
Okay. Liam, do you have any thoughts on this, or?
Yeah, I think there are some really good points there. And in a way, it's become more difficult to have these conversations because it's become such a polarizing topic that people increasingly feel pushed to take one side or the other. And I think there are a lot of people out there who maybe a year ago at this event were a bit AI curious, and now they've shut themselves off to it because it's just it's become more difficult to take a nuanced view on it. And I think you've made some really good points here on, we need to have a practical conversation about this to make it something, I think, that is attractive to developers. What they want to hear is, how exactly is this going to not just make my job easier, but make the games that I'm making better? How am I going to take this and use it to actually make a better product, make a better experience? And I think it's time to have those kind of boring conversations about how it's going to work, because that's really the only way that people are going to see how it benefits them, rather than just something that maybe it's going to take their job, or maybe it's just going to create a kind of work that they're not interested in being involved with. So let's see how we can actually get to the place that developers want to go.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe so. Shifting away from the boring part of that conversation, I think I think the part that's not boring is when we talk about loss of jobs and things like that. But we can get into that. But maybe before that, I'd really like to get your take, because I'm an AI maximalist. So I believe AI is going to just fundamentally be bigger than the internet. How much bigger? Is it 1x, 10x, 100x? I don't know. Are we going to get to super intelligence? Who knows? But I do think there's also, with any technology shift, with any new platform, there are winners and losers. And I think that we can at least extrapolate, even today, who would potentially benefit, who wins from AI and the impact of AI in terms of game studios, game developers. And so what do you guys think? What are the kinds of companies or the kinds of people that will win in this environment of AI having an impact on games?
I mean, the obvious answer is the people who work it out first. An interesting thing to talk about is we've gone around the topic a few times now of AI native games, but there's a separate concept of an AI native studio, and that is something that we're definitely seeing happening. The studios are being founded and they're building their whole tech stack from the ground up around AI. And they are not necessarily making a completely novel AI-driven experience like Aaron is. They could be making a traditional game, but they have built it from the ground up to be built with AI.
Is that true, though? Can I challenge you on that a little bit? Because,
Sure.
So a lot of the folks I talk to in bigger companies are like, they basically say, I have no time to learn about AI. We're going to fast follow. We're just going to wait and see what happens. And then the startups, we have a person dedicated to AI, like an AI engineer, product manager type of person who's actively experimenting with stuff and trying to integrate AI into workflows. But when I talk to other companies, except for Chinese companies, okay? The Chinese have got their shit together, okay? But US startups, many, I don't know of any that are really pushing AI. They just kind of They're actually just out trying to get more money to finish their game, right? Like we were talking about.
Look, I mean, that's completely, the point you're making about the big companies is absolutely right. They don't want to lead on this. They want to follow.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that this is like the median startup studio right now. Most of them are still following traditional models, but there is a new model emerging there, and someone has to be the guy that everyone else ends up following. And it is easier if you don't have all of these legacy tools and workflows to work around.
Right.
So there is a model emerging there, and I think this could be the year, even within 2025, that we see kind of the proofs of concept start to emerge. You see something come out of a studio that you wouldn't have thought could have done an experience of kind of a particular scale or quality, and that could be a big moment for catalyzing people to kind of actually start to make the effort to make that change at their studios.
Yeah, to add with that, absolutely agree. I don't think we could have done what we did in the last year or so if we weren't a startup where we started from first principles. It's not to say other organizations can't do it. There are lots of reasons why it's challenging. But at the same time, Retail Mage, when I was here at GDC last year, if you had asked me if I was going to ship a game that year, I would have said no. We conceptualized and built Retail Mage largely from scratch in 5 months. Now, it's not a huge game, but it is a multiplayer Unreal 5 game with an AI backend, and we didn't even also set out to largely leverage a bunch of AI pipelines, but the integration of that technology absolutely made us move faster. And we're a small team. We were 8 people when we shipped that.
Yeah. I'd have to agree with you. I do think that we are going to see, because of AI, a lot faster product velocity. And just to give a little color of my own experience, our studio, we've been getting our ass kicked for over 4 years working on this like mobile extraction shooter game. And we're probably going to soft launch in 3 to 4 months. We just started an AI native game, and the development cycle there is going to be 8 weeks. And whereas our company is like 44 people, we have 2 part-time people working on that game. Now, and so to your point, like I do think this is something that's actually occurring right now for a lot of companies. It's just the ability to create some kind of game, some kind of experience very, very fast using AI.
Yeah, and to your earlier question around, what companies are taking advantage, what's the ultimate impact from an AI maximalist perspective?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, in our industry, what I believe will be true, is that players will decide. Right? And most of them don't care. They don't really care what happens behind the scenes. They just want a fun experience. What I think will happen is, we already have a lot of content available.
Yeah.
For some, we'll see, is this a type of content that attracts either different players or others? I also suspect that it will continue the trend that we see with Roblox and UEFN, that the barrier to entry to creating game content will continue to get lower.
Right.
That will have a number of impacts. In fact, I'm not even quite sure what that world looks like completely. Yeah. I don't think that we will still see AAA games, right, that are unattainable without large budgets. But I think it will supercharge some of the indie movements, to be honest.
Yeah, I actually have a concept which I call like large vector to small vector development. But to your point, like by vector, I mean like time, resource, budget. And to achieve certain types of game experiences, it used to be you need this big, large vectors to get there. And to your point on Roblox, what Roblox has done is by encapsulating a lot of functionality, it opened the funnel for different kinds of creators to create and made that large vector into a small vector. But I think that's also, to your point, what AI will do is to, similar to Roblox, open up the funnel for the kinds of creators that we see, but also turn what was previously large vector to small vector. But maybe I could, just to push on this a little bit more in terms of the kinds of winners and losers that we'll see, because this has always happened, right? Any big technology disruption has always created winners and losers. Who loses? What do you guys think?
I'm going to swerve the question a bit here. I think the premise is absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that, I don't think there's any reason to think that structurally the the games market or games development is going to be worse off as an industry because of AI. There's no reason there should be fewer people making games just because it's possible to make more game content with AI. But the shape of the industry could be very different. You know, there's a shape of game and a shape of studio built around what we now understand as a AAA experience. Will exactly that kind of scale experience or that kind of scale of studio be making a game that's 10 times bigger in a few years' time? Or will there be no real market for a game like that and we won't have studios at that size anymore? So we're too early, to be honest, to say how that's going to shape out, but we have a kind of a set of categories that I think is not going to map onto how things look when the amount that you can produce per person looks.
So maybe I could ask you guys then, because I have a specific theory. Maybe I could get your reactions to this theory. And so I believe that there's this discussion about the impact of AI to organizations, talking about how today you've got like these fixed organizational structures, and with AI we would move to a completely dynamic structure. Now, I believe that's incorrect. I think that we're going to get to a midpoint where there's what I'm calling an organizational meta, meaning there are certain limitations, strengths, and weaknesses, and based upon what I believe will be like the collapse of teams and the collapse of roles, that you're going to have a certain organizational meta such that if you have a specific team structure and orientation, you will win. But the companies that cannot adapt to this, like big companies that are very fixed with monolithic game development practices, like well, they're pissed off at me anyway, so I'll just say Ubisoft. That those companies are dead. They are just completely gone. What do you guys think?
I think you might be right, but I mean, you could have said similar things about, look at the internet. That killed a lot of big companies that couldn't survive the shift, but also a lot of those legacy 20th century companies are still with us. Some of them made it. So it's very difficult to point at any one big lumbering organization and say that one won't survive the shift. Some of them will, some of them won't. But it's definitely likely that not all of actually, it's basically certain that not everyone is going to make it, but who exactly is going to make it, we can't call that right now.
I'm not sure how. It's an interesting question around the dynamics and organization, dynamics of an organization and how it responds. But I do think that there will be a difference in organizations that can keep up with the speed. So we've talked, I describe it as like improvisation or participatory media, and there's really two aspects of it. One is the DM aspects, like in the game's playing back with me, it's more participatory, it's improvisational. But it also decreases the gap between the player and the developer, because the cost of incremental content is so much lower, particularly once you have these things that now, we look at changes in other media where the cost of content changes the relationship between the consumer and the producer. You don't get diss tracks from Hollywood because you can't rapidly create a feature-length film in order to respond to that kind of conversation. But as we've created other forms of video that you get to like TikTok and YouTube, we do see that type of back and forth. Similarly, games often don't have if you've got a 4-year release cycle, you can't be part of today's zeitgeist and respond to a game that takes advantage of that today, because that release cycle is too long. When the release cycle moves from weeks to minutes, the kind of conversation I can have with my players changes. And the way I can like follow with trends and follow with a meme and come back and play back with them by releasing new content and new levels or new characters, that just changes my relationship. And I think companies that can keep up with that speed will be different.
I think you're exactly right on this, Aaron. And the way that I would characterize it is it's actually like when you think about the objective of a company or a team, ultimately it should be about shareholder value. Now, what is going to drive shareholder value the most in this new world of AI, I would argue, is product velocity, to your point, right? Taking that player feedback, adjusting to it. And so the product velocity is both a function of the direction and the speed. And with respect to the speed, then it's these teams that are dynamic, that understand the inputs to being able to speed up development and product velocity. So someone that understands the factors of production that will go in and how to optimize that, that understands how to organizationally structure a team to be as fast as possible, and that understands this notion of RT, return to intelligence, and knows how to apply AI to their team or to various capabilities. I think those are the teams that are going to win. Go ahead.
I think that's absolutely right. But kind of what strikes me when I'm listening to you say this is it's a point that would actually be true even if the AI revolution hadn't happened in the last few years. Like, this is an industry that is not set up to work efficiently, has not kept up with like best practices in like software development anyway. So like there is this, even if we weren't grappling with AI, and we are.
So you're telling me Ubisoft is dead? Is that what?
For the record, I did not say that.
Okay. So maybe also, Aaron, I'd like to also just kind of maybe go into a little bit more nuance in terms of how you're embracing AI as one of the few AI native game studios out there. When it comes to where do you apply your resources in terms of the model, in terms of like, I'll just let you talk.
Sure. So we have a hybrid process. So we work in Unreal. That's the primary engine we work with, but we also have our own AI backend. And then one thing that was really important is working in the engine. If that was one trick, if one bit of advice for anyone, we didn't sit around and just do a bunch of text prompts and be like, hey, that was really awesome, we got that, let's figure out how to put it. We actually built custom real-time, like while the game is running, I can do prompt engineering testing and change that in real time. We built those tests in engine so we could always prove that the experience is in the game and I can see it. So that was one important lesson learned. To answer your AI native question, and even the DM question, I'm gonna actually give a quick example, and it also maybe cover costs. A year ago at GDC, we had a tech demo that features about many more things than Retail Mage does. Retail Mage is about a third of the AI features we prototype. And it was very, very rough. It's a tech demo, right? But it was, so the premise is, you're in a village, there's villagers disappearing, it has our AI technology. We also have a procedural generation AI technology that we use. And so you're in a village, and villagers are disappearing, and the question is why? And so we had one set of players, they were actually, had an improv background, so very creative. They talked to the villagers, and they discover that it might be werewolves. So like, all right, okay, there's werewolves kidnapping people, what do we do? They decided they were gonna bake cookies for the werewolves to pacify them. So they talked to the villagers. The villagers were like, all right, sure, we're gonna roll with this. So they say, what do we need to do? Well, we need to gather ingredients. So we spawn a new level. We have a procedural generation process where we combine classical procedure generation with machine learning to build a new level on the fly that follows that narrative context, creates an environment where they go off, they collect the ingredients, put them in their inventory, they talk to the villagers, all right, what are we gonna do? It's like, well, there's an Elvish bakery nearby, let's go bake the cookies. So spawns a level with an Elvish bakery, an oven, they go in, they put the ingredients in the oven, out pop some cookies that have in-game effects attached to them. They're like, all right, let's go find the werewolves. So they go find the werewolves, they throw the cookies at werewolves, werewolves were not impressed. But all of that was emergent gameplay. Right? I never programmed cookies. I never programmed an Elvish bakery. We have a game asset library that's just going to pull from to build these things on real time. So I don't know if from the dungeon master side whether there will be an embodied DM there. I think we look at it more as like the AI director that we saw from like Left 4 Dead and that kind of tradition. The game is playing back with you. It's a bit more invisible. But I think we're very close to being able to do this. If I'll add one more part to it from a cost side, though, when we were first prototyping this and using some of now the API costs have dropped, but using API costs from like OpenAI and Anthropic and some of the other cloud vendors, a 4-player session on that would run the API cost of a ticket to Disneyland. Like, you can't do that. Part of the work that we did last year is to drop that from hundreds of dollars to dimes. But that required us getting our hands dirty, a lot more than I expected, and building our own AI stack, using our own foundational models that we fine tune, a lot of collaboration with Amazon in order to reduce those costs. And I think that's another area where developers, understandably, will look at that and extrapolate and be like, I can't. There's no way we can build a game if it's going to cost $200 every time a player plays. I think we, as a startup, we're just going to move forward, but that is a limitation. And I don't think the game industry needs to be on the forefront of this, partnering with some of these other AI companies, because that's the only way we'll bring down these costs and make the operations and such that other studios will be able to follow behind and build the kind of experiences we want to see.
Yeah, and to your point though about where you have been applying your resources, because if you're working on your own model and things like that, one of the interesting things that I've discovered is just so much is happening on a daily basis. And so to this issue of how dynamic the AI space is, because almost daily something new happens, like, oh shit, ByteDance released this open source model. Oh, Sesame just open source and this and that. So then how do you think about where do you apply your resources and where do you stop? Like when you think about, okay, we're going to use this when something new is popping up every day.
Yeah. I take some solace in that is not necessarily a new problem in technology. We always have, I have often been at the cutting edge of new technologies, and you have to kind of decide where those are. But we specifically, so we use open weight models, and we specifically actually have built a set of benchmarks and unit tests that we have so that we can onboard new models and test them to see how do they perform. Because we're anticipating. I think the important part is to anticipate change. And build a platform and technology stack so that you're able to onboard new technology. It's not easy. We'll get it wrong a couple of times. I certainly have over my career. But we shouldn't be surprised that next week a new model will come out, right? So it does require a little bit of a little bit of planning in that regard.
Yeah, in some ways, this kind of takes us full circle back to the start of this conversation. So the thing I said there was, even if there was no further progress, we would, at the foundational level, there would still be a lot more work to do. That's definitely not the same thing as saying it doesn't matter whether there's more progress at the foundational level. Every single time that the models move forward, that the hardware moves forward, that's enabling use cases that don't. You might be able to dream them up, but they're just uneconomic right now. But every step forward unlocks a whole set of new things. So there's already 1,000 things we can do, but each additional piece of news that we hear, whether it's DeepSeek or whatever coming through, that's unlocking a new set of things that you can do in reality every single time.
Yeah. So the other question I think is important to ask for me, because I have a lot of friends in the games industry, and some of them are like, all this stuff you talk about AI is pie in the sky. Come on, show me the impact it has right now. So maybe the question I could ask you guys is in terms of what you're able to do now versus, or maybe even more short-term, near-term. So for example, I'm very excited about MCP and agentic and the potential ability for leveraging both of those things to automate workflows, for example. So, a specific example would be like, could we automate a battle pass season completely, for example? And with MCP, one of the things that's been exciting that we can do right now is use like Windsurf and MCP and Claude to like have it audit an entire code base, have it evaluate specific developers on how they code, find risks in the code and things like that. And so from a right now or near term perspective, are there specific breakthroughs in AI or capabilities in AI that you guys think the audience should be aware of?
I would say the areas where kind of we're already there and all that's left to be figured out is implementation. From my point of view, obviously 2D asset generation. That's there's stuff to be worked out there, but it's all tooling and pipelines really. Live ops, like you say, basically worked out, kind of fully implementable right now. Dialogue, voice, sound. There's a lot of stuff that kind of is already there, and really we're just waiting to see the game that leverages this stuff to the max. So there's a huge amount that is, we're just waiting to see it. It's we're not waiting for a breakthrough in tech. We're just waiting for a breakthrough in delivery.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, you know, there are a lot of things that I think being so close to it, I start to take for granted. Like, our team uses co-pilots. That does not necessarily mean that all of our code is generated, but there are times we are learning how to as pragmatic engineers who want to just get things done, but have a high quality bar. We're learning how to use that, and we use a bunch of AI tools across the board to improve, summarization and meeting summarization, and like a lot of other kind of productivity tools. What surprised us was as we integrated in our AI workflow, our engine that we have, as we integrated that. So, actually, better way to say it. I think that one day, what we're kind of building to is a holodeck-like experience. An environment, now put the AI, or put the VR, AR side of it, which I also think would be amazing and cool, but that kind of responsive world that responds back to you within whatever parameters, it feels alive. Like, it's games we've always been seeking that, whether it's GTA or other kind of games, right? We want to move towards these kind of holodeck-like experience. If you have technology that enables the holodeck, that means your tools have holodeck magic too, and your tools will take advantage of it. So I think one of the issue with some of the AI tooling right now, it's too low level. If all you give me is an LLM, the real hard work is the integration into the rest of the stack. And the integration, like, you give me dialogue, that's great, but how does that affect my quest system? How does that affect my in-game economy? All of these kind of questions. I think the answer is actually gonna be higher level. I suspect that someday what we'll be integrating with, like the way you integrate with these or work with these AI NPCs might be more Westworld-ish, maybe with a little less murder, but maybe more Westworld-ish, less murder. Where you're talking to them and maybe using sliders. We see some of that magic now just by having English language as part of our essentially programming language, which means that I have team members who are writing unit tests in English that we use because we build out a system for that they never would have written unit tests for because it's so much more accessible. And folks who can just dive in and because they can change, it's just so much more accessible. And we didn't set out to do that, but it was a consequence of integrating this technology into our stack.
So we have 5-10 minutes left. So I wanted to also give the audience a chance to ask questions to our esteemed speakers here. Are there any questions from the audience?
Thank you for the panel. And I have two questions. So one is, about AI games right now, AI native games right now. I mean, you talked a little bit about, what you're building, but what I'm talking about is like, games that you can actually already play that are AI native, and that would be impossible to do without AI, right? I can think of one example, and that example is Suck Up. That viral vampire game when you're a vampire, you cannot just enter a house, right? The idea is that you have to be invited by a victim, right? And that game became viral like a while ago, super funny, hilarious, right? And it went viral on YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, and things like that. Are there any other examples like that? That's point one. And the second point is, I think Joseph, you mentioned that at the beginning a little bit, the impact on human resources, right, on people, right? So we are at GDC at the time of the recording, and my understanding is that the floors are like full of job seekers, right? So do you think that, and this is something that I'm getting asked also, so what do you think is the impact on the industry in terms of staff sizes? In all of these studios. So are we still going to see like 1,000 people working on AAA games for 5 years, for instance?
Yeah, so I'm happy to get you a Steam key for Retail Mage because I would argue that is one of the only other AI native games out. In fact, the Proxima folks are amazing. We took a page from Suck Up. We share some investors. And one of the reasons we shipped that game was to prove out that there were AI native games that were able to be possible today that are commercially available. Because I agree, one of the issues is we see, to be frank, too many like just demos, or they're only available on YouTube, or they're at a conference, and we wanted to give something that players could experience right now. I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing many more, but there are not that many right now. And I'd be interested to see your take of whether you think it passes the muster for an AI native game, but there are definitely game mechanics in there that we could not have done without AI. On the other side, and I'm curious on both of your response on these. I would say the game industry is already facing issues with. It's a great time to be a player. Can be a difficult time to be a developer because we have so much content available. AI will probably not make that problem any easier. I think it's up to a lot of us to understand, how are we focusing on, again, like, it doesn't matter whether it's technology, what it's doing. Is this making better and new experiences for players? If we focus on that aspect, it will have the right kind of impact that we want, a positive impact to the industry.
Yeah, maybe I could also jump in here because as an AI maximalist, I believe there will be a pretty significant impact to teams, people, and even organizationally. And one of the things that we've seen with AI is that it basically is attacking work from the bottom and the top, right? Like, so the most mundane, repetitive tasks, it should automate away, and that's a good thing. But it's also taking very complex problems that are very difficult for humans to wrap their heads around, right? And being able to manage that complexity much better than a human can. When you think about the way that I think about it is that AI will enable a certain set of capabilities and it will take over a certain set of tasks. Now, what does that have the impact of doing? Well, it will make certain roles compress. Meaning the things that they do, the work that they do becomes smaller. So what does that mean? That means that I think roles will compress. So you may not have an engineer and a product manager anymore. You might have a product engineer. You may not have a marketer anymore. It may be a product marketer. And so this goes back to this notion that I talked about around an organizational meta. That specific design of the team and organization will necessarily shift depending on limitations, capabilities, weights. Very similar to how, when Riot changes the weights on champions in League of Legends, there's a new meta. There's going to be an organizational meta, a team meta for specific kinds of products and things of that nature. And so I do think that that's going to happen, and I do think. And by the way, I want to apologize to Ubisoft. I love their products. I criticize them. I criticize them in love because I want them to improve. But I do think that a lot of people who are not able to adapt to this, these big organizations that have fixed structures that cannot have the ability to adjust, are going to be in trouble. And I also think that there's going to be a certain role that is kind of like a organizational orchestrator that will kind of an AI and organizational orchestrator that's able to understand AI, understand RTI, the return to intelligence, and apply that to the team and organization and design the most optimal meta. Those are the teams that are going to win, and I think that's how it's going to impact organizations. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. I mean, the only thing I would add to this is I think it's a misconception to think that it follows from that there are going to be way fewer game developers in the future. Like, that's just lump of labor fallacy. So there's going to be disruption to roles, certain specialisms that exist now might not be important in the future. But I don't think there is any reason to expect that the industry as a whole is going to be a smaller industry than it is in the future. It's just going to have a different shape than it does now.
Oh, one other maybe organizational impact that I've been thinking about as well is one of the things that I noticed when years ago when I was speaking to Roblox developers is that I noticed that they have a little bit of a different way of organizing around game projects, right? And it goes back to, I don't know if you guys remember the nature, the famous essay on the nature of the firm. Like, why do we have companies? And the thought there is that it's because you have all these external transaction costs that exceed so for those reasons you have organizations. And what I saw with Roblox is that there were a lot of developers that would self-organize around projects rather than having companies. And so I do think that potentially one of the other changes that could occur, depending on how far AI goes, who knows how far it goes, but if it goes far enough, then I do think also there may be an organizational impact where you might have people that operate similar to Roblox developers, where instead of having big companies, you might actually just have bands of people that kind of combine together. I'm not a big crypto guy, but maybe they use crypto to organize the rights of the project. But then they may self-organize, and that may have an impact on organizations as well. All right, with that, I want to be respectful of time. Gabi, we are right at 12 o'clock. My God, what a moderator. What's the time?
That is very impressive. Thank you so much, JK, Joseph, Aaron, and Liam for sharing their wisdom. I think there's a lot of stuff to follow up on. So